Since debuting over 80 years ago, Batman, his supporting cast, rogues gallery, and the world they inhabit have been reinvented and reinterpreted more times than I am presently inclined to count. There have been numerous adaptations, of course, movies, TV series, audio dramas, video games. I'll talk about examples of all of those in future videos in this series, but Batman began in the comics, so that's where I'm going to begin too. Some of the most talented artists and writers in the history of the medium have worked on the character, bringing Gotham City and its legendary Caped Crusader to life again and again in the pages of thousands of comic books. Every lover of Batman comics probably has their own favorite creative team. I'd love to read about yours in the comments of this video if you feel inclined to share. It would only be fair, since I'm getting ready to tell you all about mine. My favorite Batman creative team started their run with Detective Comics number 471, the July 1977 issue. That issue contained a story titled The Dead Yet Live, featuring Professor Hugo Strange, one of Batman's earliest villains, who hadn't appeared in a new story since 1940. It was written by Steve Englehart, penciled and colored by Marshall Rogers, and inked by Terry Austin. But before I get into why the Englehart-Rogers run in Detective Comics is so great, a little background. Steve Englehart was 30 years old when he began his run on Detective Comics in 1977. He'd spent most of the early 1970s writing for Marvel Comics, where he had an era-defining 4-year stint on the Avengers. He also wrote Captain America for 2 years, Doctor Strange for a year and a half, co-created Shang-Chi, who's getting a movie this year, and worked on numerous other major characters, including the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Daredevil, Silver Surfer, and Thor. His writing during this period was smart, playful, sometimes irreverent. He showed an interest in reinvention and reinterpretation. His Captain America learns that Number One, leader of the evil secret empire, is actually a powerful government official. It's never explicitly stated, but it is heavily implied that Number One is actually the President of the United States. This revelation leads Steve Rogers to give up being Captain America and adopt the identity of Nomad. When Rogers does eventually resume being Captain America, he resolves to fight not as an agent of the American government, but as a champion of the ideals America is supposed to stand for. A familiar character reimagined, but in such a way that it feels like he's becoming what he was always supposed to be. Englehart did that for Captain America, and 2 years after his run on that title ended, he did the same thing for Batman. Englehart's 1977 run on Detective Comics actually began not with the aforementioned issue 471, but 2 months before, with issue 469, the first half of a two-parter that sees Batman tangle with the ghostly and deadly Dr. Phosphorus, who tries to poison Gotham's water supply as revenge for the nuclear accident that turned him into a radioactive skeleton. Aren't comics great? The story, which concludes in issue number 470, introduces not only Dr. Phosphorus, but also a new love interest for Bruce Wayne, Silver St. Cloud, and a new ongoing nemesis for Batman, the corrupt and powerful political boss, Rupert Thorne. The Dr. Phosphorus story was penciled by Walt Simonson, who was just about to begin his celebrated run on Thor over at Marvel. When Simonson departed the title, he was replaced as penciler by Marshall Rogers, a 27-year-old artist with only a handful of credits to his name. Among those credits were the 3 issues of Detective Comics that preceded Steve Englehart's arrival, issues 466 to 468, in which Rogers had penciled a Green Arrow backup story, a Hawkman backup, and finally, the feature story of number 468, Battle of the Thinking Machines, written by Bob Bazakis, in which Batman squares off against the Calculator. The writing in that issue is fine. The artwork is better than fine. Along with inker Terry Austin, Rogers is a fluid, dynamic storyteller, constructing page layouts that are eye-catching but easy to read, crafting action shots that burst confidently from the confines of their panels, and drawing a Batman who just looks pretty damn cool. Well, usually. Rogers was obviously a promising artist with a lot of potential, and it didn't take very long for that potential to be fulfilled. He joined Steve Englehart for Detective Comics number 471, and the rest was history. which is why I'm going to keep talking about it for a bit. So, from their very first page, we see how the combination of Englehart and Rogers benefits both creators. Working from Englehart's script, Rogers' art retains all of the positive qualities I spoke of a minute ago, but now there's this noirish mood layered over everything. Villains sitting and plotting in the dark, shadows falling starkly across the room, Batman concealing himself in the chimney to eavesdrop on the meeting. It's not merely noirish. It's pulpy, it's lurid, it's just a little bit absurd, enough to detach it from reality, but not enough to make it laughable. But it's more than just the typical Batman imagery. Look at how Rogers, who is also the colorist for this issue, renders the early evening sky in this panel, a vivid series of stripes descending from blue to pink to orange. And check out Silver, still in bed as she takes a phone call from Bruce in this panel. That is a satisfied girlfriend. I don't know what his proclivities are these days, but back in the 70s, Batman was definitely heading south of the border nightly. Englehart's skill at reinvention and his ability to strip a character down to the basics to find what makes it work are on full display throughout his Detective Comics run. As I told you already, the villain of The Dead Yet Live, published in issue number 471, is Professor Hugo Strange. This was his first appearance in a new story in 37 years. A few issues later, the villain is Deadshot, making his first appearance in 27 years. That Deadshot story from issue number 474 also features a passing reference to Julie Madison, Bruce Wayne's first girlfriend, who debuted in the comics back in 1939. In other words, it's not just the style and the atmosphere reminiscent of 1930s and 40s film noir that make Englehart and Rogers' Batman feel like a welcome throwback. Englehart is directly linking his stories to the earliest adventures of the character, reaching back to snatch pieces of the Golden Age and pull them into the 70s. Even when he uses more popular characters, he does it in a way that feels rooted in fundamentals established decades before. For example, take the best-known story from the run, the two-part Joker story from issues 475 and 476, which is usually referred to as The Laughing Fish, though that's technically only the title of the first half. It's regarded as one of the best of all Joker stories, and rightly so, I think. It's a very obvious and very intentional riff on the first two Joker stories, both of which were originally published in Batman #1 in 1940. In those stories, as in The Laughing Fish, the Joker takes to the airwaves to publicly announce his crimes before he commits them, and uses poison to murder someone who is in protective custody. The Joker of Englehart and Rogers is definitely a clown. His scheme to expose fish to a toxin that gives them Joker-esque smiles and then make a fortune by copywriting them is zany enough for the Silver Age at its silliest, but with a sharper, more violent edge. This Joker is colorful and larger than life, but make no mistake, he's also a killer without conscience or remorse. He is a terrorist, which is also how Alfred describes him in the film The Dark Knight, which likewise draws inspiration from those original Joker stories in Batman #1. He might be comical, but there's nothing funny about him. The Laughing Fish isn't just a showcase for Englehart's writing. Rogers, along with inker Terry Austin, draws this amazing multi-page chase sequence at the climax of issue 476, which sees Batman pursuing the Joker out a window, up a fire escape, across rooftops, finally ending up at a construction site where the Joker appears to meet his demise. It's cinematic and propulsive and moody. I love how well composed Rogers' panels are. Like a great film director, he knows just where to put his camera, and he's able to balance action with the densely packed word balloons and captions typical of a comic book of this era. That sense of composition is evident in the page layouts as well as the individual panels. Rogers is able to add artistic flourishes, like how the scalloped bottom of Batman's billowing cape forms the top edge of the first panel on this page from issue 475, in ways that enhance the story rather than obscuring it. And he's just as good at quieter scenes as he is with action. This page from number 475, with the cape forming the top edge, is nothing but exposition. It's Batman swinging through the city, thinking through his feelings for Silver St. Cloud, but it's absolutely gorgeous. and well composed, the thought balloons overlapping the panels to guide our eye across the page. There's a caption at the top of the page cheekily apologizing for the lack of action, but when expository dialogue is delivered on top of visual storytelling this beautiful and smooth, there's no apology necessary. Something else that distinguishes the Englehart-Rogers run on Detective Comics is the variety of it. We get a 2-part Hugo Strange story at the start of the run, a 2-part Joker story at the end, and in between we get a Penguin story. I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's a solid single-issue story with a clever resolution, and a Deadshot story. The stories are self-contained enough to stand on their own, but connected to each other through ongoing subplots, like Bruce's relationship with Silver and Rupert Thorne's encounters with an apparition of Professor Strange. When those plots are resolved in the closing pages of issue number 476, it gives the entire run a sense of cohesion and completion. And, as if the atmospheric, exquisitely rendered artwork, complex but easy-to-follow plotting, and classic pulp adventure tone weren't enough, there's also some top-notch character work being done. I'm generally not a fan of giving Batman a girlfriend. The way I conceive the character, he makes more sense and is more interesting without one, but I appreciate the way Englehart writes Bruce's relationship with Silver St. Cloud. She likes Bruce, but she's neither a groupie nor a fellow rich person. She owns her own business and is able to move in the same circles as Bruce, but she also stands outside of it. She's smart. She figures out that Batman and Bruce Wayne are the same person after seeing Batman in action up close. And she has what I think is a pretty realistic human reaction to this realization: paralysis. After Silver figures it out, we have this wonderful scene between her and Batman at the beginning of The Laughing Fish in issue number 475. Batman pays Silver a visit at her apartment. She knows his secret, and he suspects that she knows his secret, and so they just kind of circle each other for a couple of pages. Batman is afraid to admit that he's Bruce Wayne, just in case she hasn't already figured it out, and Silver is afraid to admit that she's figured it out because she loves Bruce and doesn't want to scare him off. The scene is thick with tension, a tension that lingers on after Batman leaves, and compels Silver to get the hell out of town so she can get her head straight. On the way, she crosses paths with Rupert Thorne. He's leaving town for another reason, which I'll get to in a minute, and eventually finds her way back to Gotham just in time to witness the conclusion of Batman's rooftop pursuit of the Joker. After the Joker is gone, Silver approaches Batman and tells him, without ever openly admitting that she knows he's Bruce Wayne, that it's over between them, because she loves him too much to live with not knowing whether he was going to live or die on any given night. They share a final kiss, she leaves, and Batman is immediately called away by Commissioner Gordon, who has crime-related news to share. Silver represents the trade-off, the bargain Bruce Wayne makes with himself in order to be Batman. Yes, he can be a hero. He can protect his city from predators like the Joker or Rupert Thorne, but there's a cost. There's a toll that must be paid, and it's not only Bruce who pays it. We see that Silver genuinely loves him and wants to be with him, but she knows that if she lets Bruce in, Batman comes too, and that's a bargain she's not willing to make. Two of the longest tenured members of Batman's supporting cast have their roles to play too, starting with Alfred. The splash page that opens Englehart's first issue of the run, number 469, depicts a distraught Batman discovering Alfred unconscious on the floor, struck down by a mysterious illness that turns out to be related to Dr. Phosphorus. In the next issue, we see Alfred in the hospital, recovered enough to wait on his roommate, Commissioner Gordon, who has also been poisoned by phosphorus. In issue number 472, with Rogers having taken over penciling and coloring duties, we see Alfred's parental instincts on display as he watches over Bruce while they're both in the custody of Hugo Strange. Batman also gets a visit from his old chum Robin. Still rocking the green elf boots, but now grown from boy wonder to teen wonder and attending college at Hudson University, Robin drops by to help out against Professor Strange and the Penguin before being called away on Teen Titans business just prior to Deadshot's escape from prison. Because Robin isn't a kid anymore, the rapport between him and Batman is more like that of a younger brother to an older brother than a son to a father or a protege to a mentor. They're not quite equals. There's a moment in issue number 473 where Dick gets the wrong solution so that Bruce can get the correct one, but Robin is at least a step or two above being a sidekick at this point, and it makes for a fun, I guess I have to say it, don't I, dynamic between the two of them. It's not just the heroes. Englehart lends the villains some depth as well. And in another master stroke that helps to weave the separate stories of the run together into a satisfying and consistent whole, several of the villains are driven by variations of the same motivation. From Professor Hugo Strange, who goes from trying to destroy Batman to identifying with him so strongly that he ultimately wants to become him, to the Penguin, who tries to outwit Batman in order to prove he's actually as smart as he thinks he is, to Deadshot, who escapes from prison after bitterly comparing himself to other better-known members of the Rogues Gallery and vows to avenge his previous defeat and to prove himself superior to those other villains by doing what none of them have ever been able to do: kill Batman. In other words, Strange, Penguin, and Deadshot are all motivated by a kind of insecurity, a feeling that they've been denied something to which they feel entitled, cheated out of what is rightfully theirs. There are echoes of this in the Joker's scheme in The Laughing Fish as well. We don't get the feeling that the Joker is being driven by insecurity, but he is demanding credit and compensation which he doesn't actually deserve, and forcing innocent people to pay the price when he doesn't get it. But the most interesting villain in the Englehart-Rogers run is one who isn't at the center of any of these stories, but who lurks at the edges of all of them. City Council President Rupert Thorne. Thorne is a new character, created by Englehart and Walt Simonson in Detective Comics number 469, but we're told he's been a powerful presence in Gotham City politics for years. Now perceiving Batman to be a threat to his criminal activities, Thorne uses the power of the City Council to force the police to crack down on Batman. When Thorne finds out that Professor Hugo Strange has learned the secret identity of Batman, he captures Strange and has him beaten and tortured in an attempt to compel him to divulge the secret. But Strange refuses and eventually dies from the injuries sustained at the hands of Thorne's goons. In the days that follow, Thorne begins to see ghostly visions of Strange, who appears to taunt Thorne and threaten revenge. These hauntings, which are the basis for the collective title Strange Apparitions, which is sometimes used to refer to the Englehart-Rogers run, eventually become so disturbing that Thorne is compelled to flee the city. Thorne picks up Silver St. Cloud, whose car has broken down and left her stranded, but he kicks her out after she takes up for Batman in an argument. Thorne drives on until one final encounter with the ghost of Professor Strange, who flies through the windshield to strangle Thorne, telling him they are both about to rest in peace. When Commissioner Gordon arrives on the scene following Batman's last conversation with Silver, he's bringing news about the capture of Thorne, who was picked up by the Highway Patrol and has since been compulsively confessing to every crime he's ever committed. It's a peculiar, unexpected place for Thorne to wind up, and it implies that Thorne is such a bastard that he has earned a supernatural comeuppance. The most obvious read is that Strange's ghost is real, that he is somehow actually appearing to Thorne from beyond the grave, and when he leaps through Thorne's windshield to strangle him, that's actually happening. There's no explanation for how or why Hugo Strange is able to return from the grave, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. This is a superhero comic book, and it's the 1970s, when things are starting to take a darker, more serious turn, but are still goofy enough to allow for things like dead villains returning as literal ghosts to occur. This interpretation is supported by the fact that Strange's ghost appears to Batman as well as to Thorne. Batman doesn't get a good look at him and shrugs it off, but we see him clearly. And immediately following the appearance of Strange's ghost, Batman finds a vapor analysis meter mysteriously left there for him to find, which helps him to catch the Joker a bit later on. Batman notes that there are no footprints where he thought he saw Strange standing. Is Professor Strange, who came to identify with Batman so strongly that he wanted to become him, who refused to give up Batman's secret identity to Thorne even at the point of death, reaching out from beyond the grave to help Batman? That certainly seems to be the conclusion Englehart is leading us to draw. Thorne is the sort of villain Batman seems the least equipped to handle. He's not a mobster. He's not a costume psychopath holding the city hostage. He's a crooked politician. And when we meet him, he's already achieved his goals. Most villains in superhero stories are after something. They have schemes and goals. They want to elevate their status or take revenge on their enemies. But Thorne has power and status and influence. His schemes are all centered on protecting what he already has. And since he controls the city council, the courts, and to a degree the police, he's more or less untouchable. What's Batman supposed to do about someone like Rupert Thorne? That's a good question, and it's one we're left to ponder because it's ultimately not Batman who brings down Thorne, but Thorne himself. His own actions come back to haunt him, literally, leading to the collapse of his empire and, apparently, his sanity. The Steve Englehart Marshall Rogers run on Detective Comics is one of the most celebrated runs in the history of Batman comics, and yet the two of them worked together on only 6 issues. Rogers penciled several more issues after Englehart left, including a 2-parter written by Len Wein that introduces the Preston Payne version of Clayface, before moving on to other projects. In 2005, Englehart and Rogers reunited with inker Terry Austin for the miniseries Batman Dark Detective. Silver St. Cloud returns to Gotham for the first time since saying goodbye to Batman at the end of Detective Comics number 476. The Joker runs for governor. Two-Face and Scarecrow show up to cause trouble too. It's fun. There's a poignancy to the Bruce and Silver stuff. Overall, it's not bad, but nothing to write home about. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the team of Englehart and Rogers is found in one of the projects they inspired, Batman the Animated Series. Englehart and Rogers' run on Detective Comics is a major point of reference for the animated series. Rupert Thorne is a recurring villain, Dick Grayson is a college student, and The Laughing Fish and the Hugo Strange 2-parter were each adapted as animated series episodes, with the animated version of The Laughing Fish proving just as popular with fans and critics as the original. Many brilliant artists and writers have created great Batman stories over the years. So what is it about the Englehart-Rogers run on Detective Comics in particular? Why do I have a panel from it hanging on my wall? Part of it, I think, is that it was so brief. A half-dozen issues of Detective Comics. That's all. Playing through those half-dozen issues, we find notes of mystery, adventure, romance, horror, and the execution is masterful. Englehart and Rogers do so many different things in the course of those 6 issues, and they do everything well. Those various pieces fit together to form this perfect object. It's dark without being grim, action-packed without glorifying the violence it depicts, serious without taking itself too seriously, and centered on a version of Batman who is mysterious, heroic, noble, and surrounded by people who love and respect him, but finally, alone. He's a tragic hero, but not a depressing one. I've lost track of how many times I've read the Englehart and Rogers run of Detective Comics over the years, and every time it's reminded me of why I love this character so much. Why does this guy get a spot on the wall? Simple. Because he's the best Batman ever.